there's Nazi factions, all around the world. The problem with Ukraine is that these Nazi movements have came into the government, and the government is supporting Nazi movements. And I love it when people scream at me, "Well, what about Zelensky? He's Jewish, and how can this be?" What did you learn about Stepan Banderas' life that maybe you didn't know before? And what did you learn about Stepan Bandera? What can you say about him? And what kind of impression did that leave on you?
Well, it's, it seems to me that he really didn't do a whole lot, especially throughout the Second World War II. Like, he was staying behind the bars at a concentration camp, but nonetheless, the people who survived the war, the remnants of Owen and Upa, they elevated him into the symbol of that generation. So he symbolized the whole generation's suffering, hardship, and and rally point, for the lack of better ones. It's something, someone who can bring Ukrainians from all generations together under one flag or one cause or whatever you want to call it. And if you ask me, from a person who's not from that background, it is not a good approach about continuing nation building, because he's a symbol that represents this very detestable part of the human mentality, that we're we're a creature of habit. We do the same thing over and over while expecting a better or a different result, at least. But it doesn't work that way, right? More often than not. And he also serves as a perfect excuse for Mr. Putin to continue on with his campaign in Ukraine. Because how can you not say that there are no Nazis in Ukraine when you have a I won't say all parts of Ukraine support him as our father, but the Western Ukraine most certainly do, and there's at least like several dozens of Bandera statues all across Western Ukraine.
Mhm.
And so when a person who's not of the Ukrainian origin sees that, how can you not I mean, how can you convince us that there are no Nazis in Ukraine? It's and one thing that I want to also mention is that John Paul Himka, Chrystia Freeland's uncle, he does put it up. Well, in one of his papers, he points out that Ukrainian narrative is not very convincing to the outsiders, and to me, definitely, it's not convincing, unfortunately.
I have to say that a lot of people don't realize. Maybe I don't know if you learned this when you were doing your research, but Stepan Bandera was very much a Western plant. There, if you dive deep into the history of that region of the region where I'm from, um, Western Ukraine has always been, as you mentioned before, a catalyst to destroy what was before considered Rus, and in time that turned into Soviet Union. Well, Rus, Russian Empire, Soviet Union. Um, so I don't know if you have learned this, but I have learned this, that Stepan Bandera and Shukhevich, they were Western plants. You know, I don't know if it was the CIA, MI6, whatever it was, but one of the signs for that is because a lot of the people that collaborated with the Nazis after World War II got a free ride to such places as Canada.
Hmm.
So, um have you seen and we're gonna kind of get into the whole Canada Ukrainian diaspora thing. Have you noticed in your studies and in your diving deep into the subject that perhaps the um the people that come from the the UPA people that came into Canada, do you see kind of their kids and their grandkids are the ones that are kind of building this whole hysteria of Ukraine and the Ukrainian cause in Canada?
Well, if you go to the rallies, like every once in a while, the Ukrainians in the well, everywhere in Canada, but especially in the priories like Edmonton, Alberta, that's actually the big largest city in Alberta, province of Alberta, where there's a big Ukrainian community. And if you if you see one of well, and obviously they like to post this on Instagram or Facebook, and there's at least a one person that brings out the black the red and black UPA flag. So there definitely is the presence of that UPA descent stuff. That's what I like. What I'll probably call them. And all the universities like University of Alberta, and I think there's one in Toronto too. University of Toronto too. They all have these Ukrainian Studies institutes, and unfortunately, they've been producing the academic papers, journal articles that are sympathetic to the radical nationalist causes. And unfortunately, it's not something that I can condone. Um,
Mm.
um, I understand what you're trying to do, but sugarcoating your history, especially that period of time, that is going to do more harm to your cause than good. And
Well,
I can go on and on about this. So I'm just going to leave it there for now.
okay, cool. That was it was very well said. One thing that I would really love for people to realize is that it's not a problem that they say there's Nazis in Ukraine because there's Nazis everywhere. If anyone has ever traveled anywhere, there's Nazi factions, all around the world. The problem with Ukraine is that these Nazi movements have came into the government, and the government is supporting Nazi movements. And I love it when people scream at me, well, what about Zelensky? He's Jewish, and how can this be? Well, this is how twisted the whole thing is, that yes, a Jewish president that is, in fact, he's not in control, but yeah, they're supporting on a government level, they're supporting these Nazi movements, just like idolizing someone like Stepan Bandera. There's a big street in Kiev named after Bandera. I come from Lviv's province, as you mentioned, Orwell. There are statues of Stepan Bandera.
The one thing that I really wanted to highlight is that the what some people call the tribal conflicts or ethnic conflict that's happening overseas. It's already happening here. If you haven't noticed, that's the message I want to bring. Shout out to as many people as possible. And the one example that's been happening outside of the Ukrainian diaspora is the Sikhs, the people from Punjab province in India, and the people who came here well, there was a bulk of population from that region came to Canada in the 80s because there was a ethnic strife between the Hindus and the Sikhs, and people are getting massacred on both sides. And a lot of Sikhs came to Canada, and obviously they still they're very resentful about the Indian government, but the Indian government in 2024 is not the Indian government in 1980s. There's been lots of changes, but people's who are survivors of that massacre or the bloodshed still hold that grudge, and they've been ever since they came to Canada. Uh, they've been supportive of the Sikh separatism. So they want to set up an independent state. They call it Khalistan.
Oh wow.
And yeah, and I think the one there was this they're like a there was this like their spiritual leader in city called city in there's The city's name is Surrey. It's in British Columbia. One guy got actually assassinated, and uh, it's not entirely clear whether the Indian government actually sent like an assassin to pull the trigger and kill the guy. But well, Trudeau being Trudeau, he actually said publicly that it was actually Indian government who sent an agent to assassinate this guy. It created this huge diplomatic shitstorm. And ever since then, they've been like multiple protests that get across Canada where the Sikhs who wants to separate from they want to see their home province getting separate from India. They've been protesting, and obviously the Indians here in Canada they don't want any of the provinces in India to separate and become an independent state. So there's been like counter protests and counter protests here and there, mostly in the cities where there's a big Indian and Sikh population, like Toronto, for example.
Mhm.
And yeah, that also concerns me. And I also mentioned about Quebec. Quebec not has not give up on any of their bad habits, and they're one legislation the provincial government that recently introduced not too long ago, it was sometime in last year, they actually want the businesses in Quebec to report the number of employees that they're not fluent in French. That's how bad it is, and it sounds pretty much same to what's happening in Ukraine in the past few years, right? Like the persecution against the people who speak Russian as their main language.
Mhm.
So there's this ethnic conflict from overseas. Well, not just overseas, but it's been happening domestically for over a century, and it's getting worse and worse one at a time. And now we also see the Israel versus Palestine protests happening here and there,
Mhm.
and also that bulk of the protests is happening in metropolitan cities like Toronto too. So, and it concerns me because these are not, in my opinion, these are not our priorities. For the people who are affected by the conflict, it might be, but I mean, look around you. Like America and Canada, like all three North American countries, Mexico included, we're like a house on fire. I don't really think
Mhm.
we have the luxury to get involved in other people's conflict at the moment.
We're gonna get into the title of your book. In your opinion, what was the cause of the conflict in Ukraine? And who's basically my question is, in your opinion, whose fault is it?
Whose fault? It's everyone's fault, really, if you ask me.
It's a good
But
answer.
well in my book. Well, for the purpose of my book, I'm pointing out the radical nationalists in Ukraine that their faults. And one big main reason that they did was they actually provided a bulk of ammunition for Putin and his propaganda army to keep justifying their side of campaign, like their war in Ukraine as a effort to denazify. And one example that would be mentioned talked about earlier is the Stepan Bandera statues that are erected all across Western Ukraine, and
Mhm.
these kind of efforts are actually not helping Ukraine, but it's actually helping Russia. That's another key point in my book that I really wanted to point out.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm. I don't want. I'm gonna, I guess, talk about the whole ethnic thing. A little later. You're the first part of the title of your book, 90 Seconds to Midnight. What do you mean by that?
I got the idea from there's an organization called the uh, excuse me for a sec. Yeah, there's an organization called Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. They wrote a paper not too long ago. Actually, I forgot it was before or shortly after the war, but it was back in 22. And basically they're saying that we're close to the nuclear apocalypse or World War III than ever. just since the invention of the atomic bomb in 1945. So I got the idea of title for my book from there.
Yeah, if anyone wants, you can always go and Google Doomsday Clock, and I believe the clock is right now 90 seconds. And as you just mentioned, Orwell, we have never been this close. I mean, if you think about even the whole time of the Cold War, how tense things were back then, and even then, we weren't as close to a nuclear holocaust. And this is why these issues are so important. We in the West, I always say that Americans, I don't, I don't know about Canada, but Americans have been too fed, and this is why Americans are extremely passive. And they're like, oh, nothing is going on until something comes to your front door and starts, kicking the trying to kick the door out. Is That's when people sort of like, oh, what's happening? um do you think that we are in, like, are we in World War III, and are we in fact close to a nuclear apocalypse, or is this more of a title than a reality?